first reading this morning is from Deuteronomy. Look here. Today I've set before you life and what's good versus death and what's wrong. If you obey the Lord your God's commandments that I'm commanding you right now by loving the Lord your God, by walking in his ways and by keeping his commandments, his regulations, and his case laws, then you will live and thrive, and the Lord your God will bless you in the land you are entering to possess. But if your heart turns away and you refuse to listen and are so misled, worshiping other gods and serving them, I'm telling you right now that you will definitely die. You will not prolong your life on the fertile land that you are crossing the Jordan River to enter and possess. I call heaven and earth as my witness against you right now. I have set life and death, blessing and curse before you. Now choose life so that you and your descendants will live by loving the Lord your God, by obeying his voice, and by clinging to him. That's how you will survive and live long on the fertile land the Lord swore to give your ancestors, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Today's psalm is 119, and it's found on page 4 in your bulletins. Happy are they whose way is blameless, who walk in the law of the Lord.
Happy are they who observe his decrees and seek him with all their hearts.
Who never do any wrong, but always walk in his ways. Oh, that my ways were made so direct that I might keep your statutes. I will thank you with an unfeigned heart when I have learned your righteous judgments.
A reading from Paul's first letter to the Corinthians. Brothers and sisters, I couldn't talk to you like spiritual people, but like unspiritual people, like babies in Christ. I give you milk to drink instead of solid food, because you weren't up to it yet. Now you are still not up to it, because you are still unspiritual. When jealousy and fighting exist between you, aren't you unspiritual and living by human standards? When someone says, I belong to Paul, and someone else says, I belong to Apollos, aren't you acting like people without the Spirit? After all, what is Apollos? What is Paul? They are servants who helped you to believe. Each one had a role given to them by the Lord. I planted, Apollos watered, but God made it grow. Because of this, neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything. But the only one who is anything is God, who makes it grow. The one who plants and the one who waters work together, but each one will receive their own reward for their own labor. We are God's co-workers, and you are God's field, God's building. The word of the Lord.
Thank you. Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to Matthew. Jesus said, "You've heard that it was said to those who lived long ago, 'Don't commit murder,' and all who commit murder will be in danger of judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with their brother or sister will be in danger of judgment. If they say to their brother or sister, 'You idiot,' they will be in danger of being condemned by the governing council. And if they say, 'You fool,' you'll be in danger of fiery hell. Therefore, if you bring your gift to the altar, and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift at the altar and go. First make things right with your brother or sister, and then come back and offer your gift. Be sure to make friends quickly with your opponents while you're with them on the way to court. Otherwise, they will haul you before the judge. The judge will turn you over to the officer of the court, and you will be thrown into prison. I say to you in all seriousness that you won't get out of there until you paid the very last penny. You've heard that it was said, 'Don't commit adultery.' But I say to you that every man who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery in his heart. And if your right eye causes you to fall into sin, tear it out and throw it away. It's better that you lose a part of your body than that your whole body be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to fall into sin, chop it off and throw it away. It's better that you lose a part of your body than that your whole body go into hell. It was said, 'Whoever divorces his wife must give her a divorce certificate.' But I say to you that whoever divorces his wife except for sexual unfaithfulness forces her to commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Again, you've heard it said that those from long ago, 'Don't make a false solemn pledge, but you should follow through on what you pledge to the Lord.' But I say to you that you must not pledge at all. You must not pledge by heaven, because it is God's throne. You must not pledge by the earth, because it is God's footstool. You must not pledge by Jerusalem, because it's the city of the great King. And you must not pledge by your head, because you can't turn one hair white or black. Let your yes mean yes and your no mean no. Anything more than this comes from the evil one." The Gospel of the Lord. Please be seated. Back in the fall of 1976, we had a presidential election pitting the incumbent President Gerald Ford against the former governor of Georgia and former peanut farmer Jimmy Carter. Ford was an Episcopalian, and Carter was a Southern Baptist. Nobody cared about Ford's Anglicanism. I mean, after all, Episcopalians were and are perceived as harmless. But Southern Baptists were and are, well, they're another story. In order to settle people's minds, Jimmy Carter agreed to be interviewed by the very liberal columnist Robert Scheer. And interestingly enough, the interview was not to be published in Christianity Today or even the Atlanta Constitution for fear that not enough people would read it. Instead, the interview was published in the November 1976 issue of Playboy magazine, which I think was rather an odd choice, given that no one ever subscribed or purchased Playboy for the articles. And for those who said that they did, well, they're just lying, I'm telling you. The cover of the magazine had a scantily clad, voluptuous Playmate of the Month, and Jimmy Carter's name prominently featured next to her. The magazine hit the newsstands a few weeks before the presidential election on November 2nd. In the interview, Scheer pointedly asked presidential nominee Carter, "Do you feel you have reassured people with this interview? People who are uneasy about your religious beliefs, who wonder if you're going to make a rigid, unbending president." And Carter's response was this: I don't know if you've been to Sunday school here yet, he said, but we've had a good class last Sunday. It was a good way to learn what I believe and what the Baptists believe. What Christ taught about most was pride, that one person should never think he is any better than anybody else. The thing that's drummed into us all the time is not to be proud, not to be better than anyone else, not to look down on people, but to make ourselves acceptable in God's eyes through our own actions and recognize the simple truth that we're saved by grace. I'm not trying to commit a deliberate sin, Carter said. I recognize that I'm going to do it anyhow because I'm human and I'm tempted. And Christ set some almost impossible standards for us. Christ said, I tell you that anyone who looks on a woman with lust has in his heart already committed adultery. And here's the big part. Carter went on to say, I've looked on a lot of women with lust. I've committed adultery in my heart many times. This is something that God recognizes I will do, and I have done it, and God forgives me for it. Now, I want to remind you that this article came out just a couple of weeks prior to the election. A presidential candidate admitted that he had lusted after a lot of women and committed adultery in his heart. Jerry Falwell, Jim Baker, Pat Robertson, and all the big-name evangelical clergy excoriated Carter for his sin. Political pundits, Carter's own advisors were worried that he just caused himself to lose the election. I mean, after all, if a presidential candidate today were to admit that he lusted after women, would you vote for him? Probably not. However, if you voted in 1976, did you vote for an adulterer? Carter won the election. He won the election, which I seriously doubt he would win today. And perhaps one might say that this is because we are more aware, more sensitive to the sins of our past, and that today we've progressed beyond them. And you know, in part I think that's true. However, I think the deeper truth is embedded in our gospel lesson for today, something which I think Jimmy Carter understood and that we don't understand today. Jesus tells us today that all who commit murder will be in danger of judgment. I think we're okay with this. But then, like a candidate for political office, Jesus' mouth seems to get ahead of his brain, because he goes on to say, and I'm here also to tell you that everyone who is angry with their brother or sister will be in danger of judgment. And if you say to your brother or sister, you fool, you will be in danger of fiery hell. Dante's fifth circle of hell is reserved for the wrathful and the sullen. Wrath and sullenness are both the result of anger. Wrath is anger projected outwards, and sullenness is anger turned inward. I will tell you, I can't drive down the 405 without calling someone an idiot or a fool. I can't do my taxes without calling myself an idiot. It's hard not to think that Jesus is being, harsh here. He seems to be expecting a lot. I get judgment for murder, I get it. But anger doesn't always progress to the level of murder. Again, Jesus' statement seems to be rather harsh. And then Jesus continues. You've heard it said, don't commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery in his heart. Now, to refresh your memory, in ancient Israel, adultery was punished by stoning both man and woman, and stoning them to death. In addition, as a side note here, in ancient Israel, adultery occurred when a married or engaged woman had intimate relations with a man, single or married. If a married man had intimate relations with a single woman, there was no adultery. The sin, you see, was not against the woman, but against a married woman's husband. A married man was not an adulterer if he had affairs with multiple single women. Adultery only involved a married woman, and the offense was not against her, but her husband. Jesus tightens the reins on adultery by declaring that any man who even so much as looks or dreams or thinks of a woman lustfully is guilty of adultery. Now, I will tell you, just doing research on Jimmy Carter's interview in Playboy for this sermon punched this researcher's ticket into Dante's second circuit of hell, which is reserved for sinners of lust. Interesting enough, lust within marriage, like sex, is okay. In other words, it's okay to lust for your husband or wife. Like sex, it's only dirty when it's done outside of marriage, you see. Now let's do a little Bible study here, okay? Jesus appears to be either contradicting or expanding the Old Testament. I mean, after all, he begins each section of our passage today with, "You have heard it said by those who lived long ago," in other words, Moses and the writers of the Hebrew Bible. But then he finishes with, "But I say to you." It appears rather clear that Jesus is updating or contradicting the Hebrew Bible, which earlier in chapter 5, he has clearly stated that he came not to do away with, but rather to fulfill. But neither is the case. Jesus is not giving us new laws. There's a common mistake in Christian biblical interpretation. His purpose is for his followers to have purity of heart, purity of intention. Jesus knew that obedience to rules, even to the Torah, does not automatically produce righteousness. The letter of the law does not give life. One may refrain from murder and still hate, refrain from committing adultery and still lust in the heart. Thus, in order to attain perfect conformity to God's will, one must be animated by something that cannot be formulated by rules. And thus, the follower of Jesus is to seek purity of heart. Jimmy Carter never committed physical adultery. His adultery was in his own heart, in his personal, private relationship with his God, and not within the public sphere of objective reality. And this is the crucial point. There's a difference between that which is personal and private and that which is objective and public. The twain don't always meet. Carter's struggle was between him and his God. Christ calls us to compassion, forgiveness, and loving our enemies. Jesus calls us to perfection despite knowing that we are imperfect human beings. We are only saved by the grace of God, who created us imperfect in the first place. It's important that our deeds be aligned with God's will, but so also are our desires and thoughts. However, by Jesus' comments today, he clearly understands our private intentions and thoughts are not the same as our public deeds. Yeah, but we all know this. You know, for example, many years ago while I was doing premarital counseling for a couple, the issue of Valentine's Day came up. It probably came up for a lot of you just the other day. The woman was hurt because the man didn't make a big deal out of it. She wanted flowers, a sweet card, perhaps dinner, foot massage. He didn't believe in Valentine's Day. His point was that Valentine's Day was created by Hallmark and supported by the floral industry to make money. To him, the day had no meaning. And that by not believing in the day didn't negate his love for her in any way. And he was adamant about it. And I have to agree with him. However, even though Valentine's Day meant nothing to him, it meant something to her. And thus, because it means something to her and he loves her, then out of love for another person, we sacrifice for them. He didn't have to like Valentine's Day. It's irrelevant that he doesn't believe in Valentine's Day. But if his soon-to-be wife did, then he needed to celebrate it. He was to celebrate it because it doesn't matter what his thoughts or feelings were. What matters are his deeds and actions. He's not to be judged by his feelings about Valentine's Day. He's to be judged by his actions with regards to Valentine's Day. Simply because he doesn't believe in Valentine's Day doesn't mean he doesn't love his fiancée. By refusing to show her his love for her on Valentine's Day because she does think the day is important, then now you see that would be a different story. We all want others' intentions, others' feelings, their thoughts to be in conjunction with their deeds and action. But that's not going to happen often. This does not mean that we should not try to be pure in heart and pure in intention. But it does mean that that which is personal and private belongs between God and us and is not to be judged and punished socially or publicly, because without action they are irrelevant to others. It's how people treat us that's important, and not what they may think or not think. And here is where I go from preaching to meddling, as a parishioner of mine in Georgia used to say. The church for centuries has attempted to condemn through guilt our private feelings, desires, and thoughts. The church has always wanted a visible culture of purity. Therefore, it wasn't enough to bring a date to the drive-in movie and simply eat popcorn and watch the movie if all the while your desires were exploding inside of you. Thinking, lusting thoughts was just as bad as acting on them, and that's just not the case. As much as we might not like it, judgment is reserved for public actions. We are not to be condemned, nor are we to condemn others for that which is personal and private in their heart. That again is between the individual and their God. This is not to say that we are not to strive to conquer our private desires and thoughts, but that is up to each person individually and not up to society to force through laws or punishments. We are to judge and be judged on our deeds and not our thoughts or purity of intentions. I think in 1976, people understood this distinction between public and private. Everybody lusts. Everybody commits sins of intention, sins of purity. Carter was simply bold enough to admit it. Carter was smart enough to know that the world judges our actions, but it is only God who judges through grace our thoughts, intentions, emotions, and desires. But society is beginning to view things differently today. I think social media, in its attempts to be more open, communal, and sharing, has actually caused us to be more restrictive, more Victorian in our culture. We now live in a purity culture. With Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, and TikTok, people share all sorts of very private things, especially in photos. That which was once shared in a private letter or private diary is now worldwide for everyone to see and take advantage of and to judge you. It has become acceptable for future employers and certainly college admissions personnel to research your private Facebook or Instagram postings. You know, I've heard younger folks say that, well, they are more open and communal, less concerned with privacy, but I don't believe them. But if it is true, then you need to know that the standard for judgment will not be what you do, but what you think, what you believe, fantasize, and desire. You will be judged by that which is private. And my hunch is there is no one in here who would like to see all their inner feelings and intentions projected on a screen at the Northridge Cinema for everybody to go and see. And we don't, because we're not perfect. We know we're not perfect. We're embarrassed by many of our desires and thoughts. We wish we could do better, but we just can't. I think such things belong between you and God. But with Alexa listening into everything we say, Amazon tracking and making recommendations on the sometimes very personal things we buy, and corporations gathering all sorts of personal data, we are setting ourselves up for a time when we will be punished in the public sphere for what we feel or think in our personal and private selves, and that is dangerous. God may be graceful, but others who don't like what you believe or think or feel are mean and vengeful. You know, I know people who don't believe in gay marriage. They are good, wonderful people who keep their beliefs to themselves, and yet they live in fear that they'll be outed and socially shamed and denied opportunity because of what they believe. When we lose our freedom of thought, we lose our uniqueness created, formed, and guided by God. There are many in the church and in society who would very much like this. Just know, it is only by the grace of God that any of us can pass the purity test. We can't force people to be pure of heart. That is solely within the realm of God. And remember also Jesus' statement to those who wanted to stone the woman caught in adultery. Let he who is without sin cast the first stone. Amen.